Hello Cloggers and welcome to this lecture. And this lecture is all about AWS organizations. So let's get started. So what are AWS organizations? Well, if you've already done any of our associate courses, you may already be familiar with AWS organizations. So this might be a bit of a recap for you, but for those who haven't come across organizations before, it's an account management service which allows you to consolidate multiple AWS accounts into one single organization, which you can then manage centrally for consolidated billing. And you can also organize or group your accounts into organizational units for centralized access control. And you can do this by attaching policy-based controls. And within the context of organizations, these policies are called service control policies. So organizational units make it really easy to comply with corporate security and compliance requirements, and they allow you to create different groups of accounts. So for example, you might want to create one organizational unit for development and one for production, and then you can apply different access policies to each different group or organizational unit. So you can attach one service control policy to, say, the development group, allowing access to one set of services, and then attach a different service control policy to a different organizational unit called production, allowing access to a restricted set of services. So let's take a look at a typical AWS organization's account hierarchy. And at the top of the tree, we have the root, which is the master account. And it's this master account which administers everything within the organization. And we have three different organizational units here in this example. So we have one for development, one for test, and one for QA. And you can attach different service control policies at either the organizational unit level, or they can also be attached to individual accounts as well. And these allow you to restrict access to specific AWS actions and resources. And the organizational model, it's really like a hierarchy. And when you attach a service control policy to an organizational unit, that service control policy is then going to be inherited by any account or organizational unit which is underneath that organizational unit. So a service control policy is used to centrally control the use of AWS services across multiple accounts, and it acts like a filter which restricts access to AWS services. So it applies to all organizational units and accounts below the organizational unit to which it is attached, and it can be used to create what is known as a permissions boundary. And if you haven't heard of a permissions boundary before, that just means it's used to restrict access. So it will restrict the actions that the users, group, or roles in those accounts can do, including the root account as well. And the service control policy will actually override any other permissions that the user has set up within their own AWS account, so within their local identity access management policies. For example, if a user had access to create S3 buckets in their own account, but then we went ahead and attached a service control policy which completely denied access to create S3 buckets, then access will be denied. So you can see that the service control policy is a really powerful way to restrict access because it's going to override any local configuration. And finally, service control policies can only deny access. They can't be configured to allow access. So let's take a look at an example service control policy. And it looks exactly like a normal identity access management policy. So we have the version and the statement. And the effect is deny because it's always going to be deny. And in this case, the action is CloudTrail stop logging. So in this example, this service control policy is going to restrict the ability to disable CloudTrail logging. And if you have a secure environment, this is probably something that you would definitely want to restrict. You wouldn't want people turning off CloudTrail logging, and you can use a service control policy to manage that centrally within AWS organizations. So moving on to some of our exam tips. Just remember, AWS organizations allows you to organize your accounts into groups known as organizational units, and it allows you to centrally manage access control and billing as well. You can attach service control policies, and these allow you to centrally manage your access permissions for organizational units, so groups of accounts within the same organizational unit, and for individual accounts as well. And finally, remember that service control policies allow you to create a permissions boundary, so they can be used to restrict the permissions of all child accounts underneath the organizational unit to which they are attached, including the root user. So do be careful when attaching service control policies, because you can even end up creating a permissions boundary even for the root user itself. So the main thing that you need to remember for the exam is that you can use service control policies to create a permissions boundary, and this makes it really easy for you to comply with corporate security and compliance requirements and deny access to certain actions like disabling CloudTrail logging across multiple accounts and then manage that from one central place. So that is the end of this lecture. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.